am Tiffanie DeVan, and welcome to the Higher Education Access Corner. I am excited today to talk to you all about college access, affordability, and success. We're going to give you some advice for today's learners in Pennsylvania. And joining me in this discussion is Dr. Kim McCurdy with the Pennsylvania Department of Education. So welcome, Kim.
Thanks, Tiffany. It's great to be here.
Mm-hmm. And so what I'll do before we get started, I wanted to share some information with you all about Dr. McCurdy. So Dr. McCurdy is the Bureau Director for Postsecondary and Adult Education at the Pennsylvania Department of Education. A first-generation college student, Kim started her career in higher education as a work-study student in the financial aid office at Indiana University of Pennsylvania, where she earned her bachelor's degree in journalism. She earned a master's degree in adult education from Widener University and a PhD in instructional management and leadership from Robert Morris University. Kim also serves as adjunct faculty at Duquesne University in their MS in Higher Education Administration program. She has spent over 20 years working on college affordability, access, and success for students. So needless to say, we are in great hands, and she has lots of good information here for us today. So let's go ahead and let's get started about our discussion today. Some of the things that we talk about all of the time are kind of like, what's the why behind the higher education? And we've been around for quite some time. I think you've been, like you said, you've been doing this for over 20 years. You also have the educational experience that you had. And I don't know if you wanted to share with others, you've also at one time did the role that I do as a higher education access partner with VIA. So you've done quite an array of experience with you. And if you wanted to, could you share some of the success stories that you've seen with students, as well as some of the challenges that maybe you've seen when we're talking about higher education?
Sure. I think that one of the things that I always talk about is what is your why, and why have we been doing this work for as long as we've been doing it? And I think it's because of students. And I think as a first generation college student in the 90s, I had people who mentored me, who guided me, who gave me the things that my parents couldn't help me with. And so that's really kind of where my why started. And then I've worked at a variety of institutions, did a little stint at Bank of America in educational lending, came back to higher education, and as you said, worked for the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency as an access partner for almost 10 years. I did that work. And I think one of the really exciting things about the work that FIA does is that you're boots on the ground. You get to talk to students and their parents and their families about paying for college and what their hopes are for their future. And I think, when we went to college long ago, we kind of started on a career path and you felt like it was a ladder and you built those steps. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about today's students when you talk to them is that it's not necessarily a career ladder anymore. I call it more of a tapestry, and students are really kind of taking the knowledge that they have, weaving that together with some education or some job experience, maybe taking time off, going back. I think a lot of times when we talk to today's learners, there's a lot of trauma. We've all been through trauma over the last couple of years. And I think one of the things that I really try to think about when I'm talking to students, whether they're my graduate students at Duquesne or whether I'm talking to students in the field when we visit universities in my current role, we really try to make sure that we're not re-traumatizing students. And so we don't want to shame them or make them feel less than. We want them to know that they belong in higher education. And so, I've seen a lot of students. We administer the Bond Hill Scholarship Program here at PDE. So I've seen students graduate from that program as graduate students. And I've seen a lot of students just be able to have conversations in the financial aid office with counselors to say, I need to put these pieces together. Can you help me to figure out how to pay this bill? Where can I save? All of those things come together. So it's really exciting that we're at this point where I think the industry itself is really starting to realize the way we did things in the 80s and the 90s isn't really how today's learners work, how they are successful. And so we're really trying to innovate and create an atmosphere where students today can be successful.
Okay. So you kind of led into, I think that the next question for that is that I had, how do you think today's learners are different from learners in the 90s? And I'll share, some information on that too, on just what I think, but what are your thoughts on that? How do they differ from in the 90s?
I think there are a variety of things. I think today's learners, there are a lot of first generation college students. There are a lot of minority students at college. And so there are a lot of varied life experiences, different household makeups, just a lot of different things that growing up in an information age where everything is at your fingertips. You can look up everything on your phone. We didn't have information that wasn't at the library or with the school counselor when we were kind of coming through high school. And so there's just a lot that students can take in, that they can process. I think there's a lot of opportunity to find the place where you belong. So you don't have to stay in your backyard anymore. You can go on to another part of the state or another part of the country if you want to do that. You can study internationally. I think there's just a lot of different options for students today. And like I said, there's a collective trauma that students today have been through. High school students didn't, the last couple of years, the last 3 or 4 academic years have been, partially COVID. So there are experiences that they haven't had that a lot of students maybe have when they are transitioning, they're bridging to higher education. So I think just be mindful. The other thing also, we always talk about students as they're 18 to 24 years old. And I think that we know now that today's learners I think the average age is about 20, 28. Mm-hmm. So we know that students are not traditionally aged. They're parenting students. They're working adults. And so trying to get that education as a piece of the collective, I think is really kind of different than when we were kind of coming up as a traditionally aged student.
I totally agree. I totally agree with everything that you said. And I was going to say, number one, technology, I think, is one of the things that's really advanced from the 90s. So as a learner, a lot of times these students, when they're in kindergarten, they're being exposed to the technology, the internet, and just about everything. So their way of learning is so drastically different. And they're so much more technologically advanced than what I was in the 90s. I was going to school. Not too many people even had laptops or computers to take to school. That was considered something that was coming from the more elite schools, more prestigious schools. They may have had them. They may have had some requirements, but not too many. You usually had to go to the library, a physical library, in order to do your research, to do anything. Now, information and knowledge is just a click away. So I think that's one of the key differences that is out there. And it makes students a lot more marketable when it comes to technology skills and things like that. I do think one of the challenges, though, that are presented to students today that wasn't before is that the soft skills aren't the same. I think sometimes technology-wise, they're far more advanced, but I do find that sometimes today's students have more challenges with the soft skills, those basic things that are kind of going to get them through life in general. Maybe their communication skills aren't quite as strong. They don't know what networking really feels like, to go into a room full of potential employers and grab opportunities just through a discussion, because they're usually so linked to their phones and their computers. So when talking to students, I try to always engage them and make sure that they're aware that, hey, these are some other things you need. What are your communication skills like? What are your networking skills like? What about team management and time management, teamwork and time management? All of those things, sometimes I think there are opportunities for them to improve in this area. And I think over the past couple of years with COVID kicking in, I think that's when we started to recognize how some of those challenges were missed. And so hopefully we're now on the path where we're moving in the direction where everyone's going to put more time and energy just into the soft skills and the soft skill building. But I definitely see a big difference with the students when it comes to pre-COVID and post-COVID. I think the mental health piece is a big factor right now. And it's okay to say, hey, I have some issues. Hey, I'm not okay. Whereas before, I think in the 90s was kind of like be strong, push through. So it's nice to see that we have that awareness now. And if you need some help, you get the help, you take the resources that you need in order to become a better person, a better you, in that sense. And then also, I think sometimes, and we're going to kind of talk about this a little bit more, I think sometimes students now are more focused on the the information that is needed in order to take a test or to kind of get the top score. Whereas in the 90s, you got that, but you also had a lot of creative arts that were out there. So students were focusing on different concepts and ideas about, their major, or I want to be a music major, or even I want to be a teacher. And you don't see, I don't personally see that as much anymore, because we've gotten so structured just with the whole, I think, school system with saying we have to complete, we need you all to focus on this because this is what employers are looking at. Or we don't want you to be so focused on the other stuff because we're not going to take that seriously. Make sure you get a job that is tied to technology, or make sure you're trying, or the STEM or things like that. Whereas in the 90s, it was kind of like dream big, be whatever you want to be. That was also a different era, I think. And then sometimes for the funny things that I noticed, the difference between the 90s age and now is I've gone and I'm talking to schools, to students in schools about financial literacy. And I've shown them a checkbook and they have no idea what a checkbook is. And it makes me feel really aged. And when I'm talking about just banking styles and things like that, they're like, well, why on earth would you need to carry a book of paper around? What is the purpose of that? And I'm like, okay. Or showing them what a landline telephone is. Some don't have them. They've never had them. So it's also, again, just the fun things that I notice about a student from the 90s, to right now. So good things to know.
I have to tell you,
What's that?
Yeah, I just got Venmo on my phone, so.
Well, there you go. So at least we're advancing. And I was definitely that student who was enrolled in school in the early 90s. So I definitely feel the difference. And sometimes I need the younger student to teach me the technology pieces that are out there. They'll say, hey, no, this is how you do it. Well, here's a more efficient way. And that's the other thing. I think students do things in a more efficient manner just because that's how they grew up when it came to some things. So definitely some challenges, but I think it's challenges for a little bit of everyone.
Yep.
So what I'm going to do is now we're going to kind of shift just a little bit, and we're going to talk about some of the attainment gaps that are out there. So lots of attainment gaps across the race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, gender. There are so many different gaps that do exist, and it can kind of hinder the type of education that students are receiving for various reasons. So if we want to dig a little deeper, I know you and I were talking about that before. So can you kind of let everybody know what is an attainment gap to begin with? Like, what are some of the challenges with that? What does it look like?
So,
and what are some of the causes?
So I guess I would start with Pennsylvania in 2018 adopted an attainment goal that every Pennsylvanian between ages 18 to 64 would have 60% of those folks would have a post-secondary credential by 2025. And so we've been working over the last several years to measure that, to see what that looks like. And right now, Pennsylvania is at 50.7%. So we're not meeting the goal. We're not so far away, but we're not doing a really good job at that. When you disaggregate that data by race and ethnicity, we're finding that we're not doing a really good job at all. So even though our attainment is at 50.7%, we're finding that of that number, only 24% of our Hispanic and Latinx learners in Pennsylvania have a credential. So our Black and African American learners, only 30% of those folks have a credential. Our Native American Pennsylvanians, only 37% of those folks have a credential. 47% of white students or learners in Pennsylvania have a credential. And 65% of our Asian learners have a post-secondary credential in that age group. So if we only wanted our Asian or if we only measured our Asian learners, then we would meet that goal. But we're not across the board doing a very good job just broadly of making sure that all learners in Pennsylvania are able to meet those goals. And so some of the gaps that exist, they might be socioeconomic, they might be geography, rural schools versus urban schools. There are just a variety of reasons why we're not doing a really good job of making sure all Pennsylvanians have the same opportunity. But I think that we're working on our master plan for higher education, which will be adopted this month in September, and by the State Board of Education. And one of the things in that is, recommendations for how we can do a better job to meet our attainment goals in Pennsylvania. And then some of the metrics that we can use to start measuring, and then how do we use those metrics to improve the processes as we're educating our students.
And sometimes I think when we're talking about that, some of the challenges I think are just acknowledging that there are gaps. Because sometimes when we're talking, you can only see you're in a bubble in your own world, if you're your own counties, your own district. So you don't really know the struggles that are out there. And someone said, well, no, we're totally fine. All students are doing good. And that's not necessarily the case, or they can't feel the challenges, so to speak, that others do have that are out there. And then
I think sometimes we look at ourselves and our experience, our own experience, and we say, we're doing fine, or because I can't maybe empathize with what your experience is. We think everybody has an opportunity. If you work hard enough, you're going to be successful. And that's not the case. Not everybody has that equal opportunity. A lot of it is based on what your zip code is. And so in Pennsylvania, we need to figure out how we can get resources to those underserved populations and make sure that they have the same opportunity as everybody else.
Right. And I think, and I don't know if you would agree or not, I think sometimes we'll say, hey, here's a solution, and we're not recognizing that what works over here in this area is not quite what's going to work in the other area. So it's not just like a one size fits all solution to say, hey, we're going to throw some resources your way to try to help things out a little bit, to improve it for all students. And I think you really have to put the information out there, give them the resources, and then go back to see how well they're doing with it, to see if is it making a difference? Is it not making a difference? Poverty might be the big piece here. And so the students aren't doing really well on their scores. Sometimes, with poverty, low test scores, higher dropout rates, usually associated with that. But I could be in a different area. Maybe that is not the particular case. Maybe you have the funding, maybe they have some technology, but there are other issues. Maybe you don't have the staffing and the teacher staff who really knows how to use that particular technology. Therefore, they suffer in other ways as well. So not only getting them the information, but making sure that it's working in those particular areas, I do think makes a difference as well.
Yeah, and I love to see when the campuses have those college navigators for students. It's an additional person, somebody besides their academic advisor, who can lead them to resources that they need. We know that I know we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the basic needs that our college students today have, and food and housing and security. Those are really big things that 52% of college students experience some kind of food insecurity at some point, whether it's they're on campus during breaks, but the facilities aren't open, or they don't have places to stay during breaks if the campus doesn't stay open. There are transportation issues. There are things like technology and those digital equity issues that we talked about. So I think having just that extra resource, that extra person on campus as somebody, hey, I need X, Y, and Z, and then that person being able to say, here are community resources we can direct you to, or here is something that we're doing on campus, or here's even a program where they're having food on campus. Those kinds of things can be really valuable for students' success. So really happy to see a lot of that personal touch. And I think that that's it, right? You want to make sure that students feel comfortable, they're able to tell you what they need. We can guess, we can say, well, we think that most of our students, go home for break, and so we're not going to stay open. But unless you're actually having students at those tables where you're having those policy conversations to find out what they need, I think we're really doing a disservice to students. So I would encourage more schools to make sure that they have those one-stop shops where students can feel free to come in, get all of the resources that they need, and then be able to check in again if they need more assistance.
I think those are great points. And something else I wanted to mention, I can't quite remember. There was a conference I was at. I can't remember where it was, probably about maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And they were talking about students who have those food insecurities or some other challenges that are out there. And one of the things they were encouraging schools to do is to make sure that those resources are readily available and open to the students, just in their offices or throughout their schools. And they were saying, do this in your secondary schools as well as your post-secondary schools, because a lot of the times the students are not comfortable sharing with you, this is my situation. So therefore, they don't know that there are resources that are available to help them. They're afraid or they're ashamed, and there's a stigma sometimes associated with, not having the resources or, the food, or you're at risk of being homeless. They don't even know of all the resources. And so they were saying, for some schools and some even community organizations, house this information and don't always have it in a place where they have to connect with an adult to see it. Have it in different locations where they can grab the material, know who to contact if need be. And then they were saying, in their experience, students generally reach out a little bit more for that. And then another point I was going to add on is, I think it's also really big for your counselors in the high schools and other community areas to explain these things to students as they are looking for post-secondary schools. So when you're starting to look for a post-secondary school, if you know you have a specific need that needs to be met on campus or off campus, look for those particular schools, because some schools do have things set in place for that student who, let's say, you don't really have anywhere to go during a break. So they have things that are there for you. They have food pantries that are there, and they're connected in other ways. So you want to try to find a school, if you're looking for a post-secondary option, that can truly assist you throughout all of your experiences, not just your academia on the academic level. Make sure you can get, the other stuff too, because you don't want a student to get there, they're thriving for the first semester or two, and then something happens and they feel like, okay, I need to drop out because I have nowhere to go. I don't have any food. I don't have any housing, but there could have been resources that were there. So I think those are great points that you also made as well regarding that.
I think this is a really good opportunity. I wanted to mention the Hunger Free Campus initiative that we have happening in Pennsylvania. So the First Lady was very passionate about food insecurity on college campuses throughout the administration, and we were able to get $1 million in the governor's budget for this year coming up to stand up a grant program for higher education institutions that are doing this great work and maybe need some extra help, some extra finances to really make these programs really robust and helpful and more helpful to students. As we tour around, we often take the deputy secretary to visit a variety of campuses, and we've been to community colleges, we've been to private institutions, to public institutions. There are a lot of schools that are doing basic needs work really well. We're standing up hunger-free campus designations. So those are ongoing, the applications on our website. And so any campus that meets a variety of criteria, there are 4 things that they have to kind of check the boxes. They're able to apply for hunger-free campus designation. And then when the application's approved, we'll send them a letter from the First Lady's office. And then we'll also give them window clings that they can put in their pantry. But the grant then will enable those campuses to expand on things like refrigeration, just some other things that they could be, that could enhance the services that they're already providing to students in this area.
That's really important. Can you state the website? That way, those who are listening can go to the website to get more information, or at least guide them in the area.
So it's education.pa.gov. And then you'll find the Office of Postsecondary and Higher Education. And then we'll have the Hunger Free. If you even Google PA Hunger Free Campus, you'll be able to find the information there.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, also, in addition to that, there are also financial gaps between the cost of attendance and then what financial aid actually covers. So if you wanted to speak a little bit on that, give me some feedback on how you think things could improve or where they're at.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, particularly, people who are middle-aged that, gone to college in the 90s, we worked our way through, maybe we got a little bit of financial aid, we took out a little loan, but then we just paid the rest of the bill, right?
Mhm.
Or we paid for our books from our summer wages. I think, the cost of attendance to attend a college, the financial aid has not kept up with that. So we've experienced, the buying power of the state grant, the Pennsylvania state grant, or the Pell grant hasn't kept up with the price of college. We have the third largest borrowing in the country in Pennsylvania. So our students typically borrow around $37,000 to attend a post-secondary institution. So I think one of the things that families really need to understand is all of the costs, not just the tuition and fees or that net price, but you also need to buy books, or if you're not going to be able to stay on campus during break, where are you going to stay? How are you going to afford meals that aren't included in your meal plan? Can you afford a meal plan? There are just a lot of things that families needed to talk about. We always talk about when I was at FIA, give yourself a variety of options, apply to several schools, make sure that, there's a community college or there's a four-year institution. There are ways, 2+2 programs and other things you can do to save some money that way. I think all of those things still apply, but I also think that, we're in this space where there's a lot of talk, about free college programs and things like that. So just making sure that students are aware of all of the free money that they qualify for, never leaving any free money on the table, looking to complete their FAFSA every year, whether they qualify for grants or not. I know FIA has a Ready to Succeed scholarship program, and those students don't necessarily qualify for a state grant, more middle income, but they could qualify for a Ready to Succeed scholarship. So I always told families, just fill it out, kind of see where things land. But just know, kind of as a family, as a student with, maybe you're a parenting student, you have students, or you have other children, or, children that will go to college one day, thinking about what your family can afford, what makes sense. I talked at the beginning about, your career is really kind of a tapestry, and it's just weaving all of those pieces together. So it doesn't have to be that linear, I'm going to start at a four-year institution, I'm going to go straight to my master's program. It can be a variety of things. It can be going to a two-year institution, getting a job, having them pay for the rest of your bachelor's degree. There are just so many things that you can do creatively to help, your situation. And then for the institutions, I think making sure that you have a transparent application process and financial aid process, that you have staff available to talk to families and students about how they're going to afford things, what are their options, do you have payment plans, are there ways to have inclusive access for books, are there open education resources for books at your institution? There are a lot of things that are coming at students and families at high rates of speed. So whether they're a traditional age student or they're an older student, and I think just being able to make sure that you have a clear process, a transparent process, that everything is explainable, that there's a resource that, students can ask questions. And then I guess the other thing I would say is that sometimes students don't know the question. So they'll ask a question, but it's not really the question that they were really trying to get at. So I think being able to ensure that you're not just saying no, and then the student goes away and that's a barrier and they're not going to persist, but to say, like, let's talk about it a little bit. Let's get to the root of why you're actually in my office, and let's have a discussion. Is it a financial question that you're asking me, or is it something else? And so how can we make sure that we're communicating with our students in a really, good way that lends them to be successful, to build that rapport and that trust and that sense of belonging for students on campus?
I agree. And I think another piece I'd like to see added on is that you start this discussion a lot earlier. It's so often like if we're out and we're talking to students and families, I generally don't run into a parent who's inquiring about financial aid and how to cover those options until their junior or senior year. But if we're talking to them way earlier, like maybe even junior high school, have this discussion, start thinking about the different careers that are out there. Because a lot of times with students and families, they'll say, hey, you know what? I don't know exactly how much I'm going to need. But that's because they don't even know what career they want to go into. You don't know that, then you don't know what types of schools you'll need to go to. You don't know the cost factor because, they come at all different price points. They haven't started exploring anything. And I think if they know a lot earlier that you have to do some exploration and research on your own. You can visit schools, even virtually if you can't get to the schools, but you can then realize that, hey, there are resources that can help and assist. You don't have to break the bank in order to get the education, because the goal is to get the education you need to go into the career that you want so that you can live, a good, healthy lifestyle. It's not to break the bank on the school that has the best name or the best football team or the best soccer team. It's or the school that, maybe, hey, this is the alma mater for so many people in my family. So I would love to see the discussion about cost as well as resources take place so much earlier so that by the time they get to high school, especially their junior and senior year, they're not overwhelmed by this whole piece. And it's kind of like, oh my gosh, what do I do? I was only thinking about school for like 1 year, but now maybe you're, a family of, 4 or 5. And like you said, there's more than one student you have to consider. Sometimes the parents and the students are going to school at the very same time, and trying to figure out, how you're going to pay for everything can be overwhelming. Many times when I'm talking to students, they think that the only form of financial aid is a student loan, and that is not. That should be your last resort. So the good thing is there are resources that can assist them. We just have to make sure we're getting it in their hands. The schools, the post-secondary schools, have to get into their hands. And then hopefully the students, once they're graduating and they become parents, they'll know to start this discussion a lot earlier with their own kids to kind of help bridge that gap between, so that when the time comes where, hey, here's the bill and here's the financial aid, amount that's offered, what's outstanding, you're kind of bridging that gap that's out there where it's not going to break your bank um, at all for the students. And the good thing is the Department of Education is not going anywhere. So their main website is studentaid.gov. Fee is not going anywhere. We're pheaa.org. So those are two key resources, but those schools are also there to assist students and families. And, of course, PDE, even you all have great information on your website. It's a lot to digest if you try to do it all, right before students about to go to school. But if you break it up in little pieces, I think it's not so overwhelming at all for the students and the families.
Yeah. And I think give a shout out to the Pennsylvania School Counseling Association and all of our school counselor friends, because I think they do this work early on. They have career education work standards that they're meeting for their requirements for Pennsylvania. So they are, I think, trying as hard as they can to get the information into students' hands. And so, just a big shout out to them, because without them, I don't think that we would be even half as good as we are. There are things that we still need to do, but we do have some really great resources and some really great folks working the problem.
Absolutely. I totally agree. So before we wrap up, a couple things I would want, I'm thinking, what do you think what should students be doing right now to be successful? What can they do for themselves in order to be as successful as possible?
I mean, I think particularly if you're first generation college student, find a mentor, find if it's a work study supervisor or if it's a professor that you relate to, or even if it's your admission counselor that brought you onto campus in the first place, finding that mentor or 2 mentors or 3 mentors, just to be able to bounce ideas off of, give advice. I'm struggling, what should I do? Would you recommend that I drop this class? Would you recommend that I, continue on and take the C? Or, should I get a job? Should I not get a job? All of those questions, a mentor is really helpful. I still talk to the mentor that I had in college. She still is my mentor and I love her. And I just, when I have those big questions, having that other person to bounce an idea off of is just so key. But I would also say to students, you need to advocate for yourselves as well. And so, we talked about like the essential skills, those soft skills, communication. Sometimes it's difficult for whether you're 18 or you're 30, to talk about money or to just kind of make yourself vulnerable and say, I don't really know what's happening. I don't really understand this information. So just really allowing yourself to ask questions. And if you're not getting answers or you feel like, maybe the communication's not right, ask somebody else or find somebody else on campus
Right.
that you can talk to. Because I think sometimes, you hear the word no, or you're pretty sure that wasn't the right answer, but you don't know what to do. And so you just give up. And I would say don't give up, because your education is really important, and you're paying for that. So really persist, get the answers that you need, get into, like I said, to see a mentor, make sure you just advocate for yourself in every way possible, get all of the resources that you can. And then I would just say, finally, find a post-secondary option that's a right fit for you. So whether it's a 2-year institution, if it's a 4-year school, whether it's a business trade technical school, there are a lot of post-secondary options for students. And it doesn't matter if you're 18 or you're 45 and starting on another career, or changing careers midstream, or you just want to do something for fun, or whatever. But there are so many opportunities, and so do some exploring, find the right fit for you, because if you don't feel like you belong on campus, you're never going to succeed. And I think we talk about belonging a lot at Pennsylvania Department of Education, in the work that we do with our schools, with our staff. We really want everyone to feel that they belong, that they are valuable, and all of their contributions matter. So we want them to find that right fit. If it's not working out, talk to someone, figure out, is there a way to make it the right fit, or is it maybe that you need to move on to another opportunity?
All great points. I totally agree. Another thing that I would add on there is give yourself a little bit of grace, because sometimes I think when you're trying to figure out this process, you're really hard on yourself. Students, so often they'll say, what, I didn't get it right, or something went wrong. And sometimes they have to, like you said, advocate a little harder for yourself, go fight hard for you, and what your goals and your plans are. And if you make a mistake, guess what? It's okay. You can rebound, you learn from the mistake, and you come out stronger. And I think sometimes today's students are just so hard on themselves. And I also agree, make sure that you find the best fit for you. And it doesn't have to look like you thought it would look. Sometimes the more you grow and the more you experience, what you thought it would look like might be different. You might say, hey, you know what? I'm better suited over here. It feels natural. It feels like I'm growing. I'm learning a lot. So it's okay to change your mind. It's okay to figure it out. I still say sometimes, some days I wake up and say, I'm trying to figure out what I want to do with the rest of my life, but hopefully I've gotten it all figured out. Usually that feeling doesn't last too long. I think I'm in a good space, but the point is that it's okay to not have it all figured out and to make some mistakes in the whole process. Anything else you have to add, Dr. McCurdy? This has been a great discussion so far.
No, I think it's been a great conversation. I'm just super excited of the great things that are happening in Pennsylvania. We have 350 plus post-secondary options for students. So I think we're very well suited to, encourage our students to find the opportunity that fits them. And hopefully they'll stay in Pennsylvania and they'll work here, and they'll build their lives here. That's really exciting for me to see that come to fruition, and to be a part of some of the policy and procedures that we work on at PDE to make that possible.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you for joining me. And for our listeners, stay tuned for some future episodes, because Dr. Kim McCurdy will be joining me again in the near future. And I'm not going to spoil it right now, but we'll talk about that a little later. So again, if you didn't get anything out of this, I say listen again, because there was great information that was shared. Everything from the attainment and affordability gap to just what a college student looked like or students look like from the 90s to now. So we thank you for joining us for the Higher Education Access Corner. Make sure that you tune in to future episodes wherever you listen to your podcast, and have a good day.